Hello everyone, I'm Emily Heffernan, and this is my Success for All Tutoring Reading Final Summative Report. So first off, let's meet our tutee. And a tutee is, in this circumstance, a student that is being tutored by the reading instructor, which in this case is us, the tutors. So my tutee's name is Michael, which is a pseudonym. He is a first grade student. He is an African American. He's a male. The way I would describe Michael is that he is just extremely high energy, but in a positive way. He really enjoys the learning process, and throughout our tutoring, which I will get into, he was just very excited to be challenged and to learn new skills. Some of his hobbies include playing basketball and swimming. He told me that he has a pool at his house and he just loves to spend time swimming there. He likes to play with his friends. He told me that he loves to climb trees with his brothers. So he has two blood-related brothers. And he has two parents. Unfortunately, they're divorced, and every other weekend he spends at the other parent's house. So both of the parents are involved, which is nice. So some of his dislikes: he does not like bananas. He has a strong hatred towards them. His shoes were always untied, which whenever I'd go grab him for tutoring, they'd always be untied. He's working on learning how to tie his shoes. He also is not a big fan of mathematics, which is unfortunate, but since we're teaching reading, I really didn't have to encounter that too much. One thing about Michael was that he was very critical of himself. Whenever he would mess up, he often took that very personally. But throughout our journey, we were able to try and change that perspective and change his mindset a bit so that he could be more open to having a growth mindset, which is great. But he was such a great student to work with. He always knew how to make me laugh, and he was just a joy to be around. So next, we are going to go into our pre-assessment results, which the pre-assessment was a series of tests and assessments that were performed within the first 2 visits that I had with Michael. We were able to conclude our pre-assessment within those 2 time frames, and along the way we tested certain things that were related to the science of reading and aspects of reading and literacy, and so we're about to get into those right now. So the first set of pre-assessment results relate to PA1, which is phonemic awareness, and you can see there's a PA1, 2, and 3. While they are all phonemic awareness, they all serve different purposes in the assessment. So for PA1, which again stands for phonemic awareness, the student will listen as the instructor says a word, and then they will have to listen carefully to the word and then pronounce the beginning sound of that word. So for example, if I were to say the word dog, the student would go duh, because that's the beginning sound. And on this assessment, Michael performed very well. He got 9 out of 10 on his first try. So he was able to hear and say the initial sounds in a spoken word, so that was pretty impressive. So in the phonemic awareness assessment 2, the purpose is to blend sounds together to say a word. So as the instructor, my responsibility was to pronounce different sounds. So for example, I would say s, it, and then Michael had the responsibility of understanding those sounds and blending them together to create a word, which would be sit. And on this, Michael performed well. He received 7 out of 10, which I need to mention that mastery is 8 out of 10. So if a student achieves an 8 out of 10, then they don't have to redo that section of the assessment again. They've already mastered it. So he was close to mastering PA2, yet he still fell short of one word. Next is phonemic awareness 3, and unfortunately Michael did not perform very well in this. He only got a 1 out of 10, and in this the objective was to break down a word presented orally. So I would give him a word, for example, man, and he had to break down the separate sounds and segment them. So man would become m and n. And Michael was able to understand the first sound of a word, but he could not segment the middle and end sounds from each other. And even upon correction, telling him how to correct it, he still didn't understand the objective, and he wasn't able to perform well, which is why he received a 1 out of 10. Over time, though, his assessment results will increase. But as for this was a really big target that we focused on in our tutoring plan, but we will reach those in just a moment. The next set of assessment results are first concepts of print, which is CP. And so on this, Michael received a 4 out of 6. Which is pretty good, but still needs to be developed. So in concepts of print, Michael had to learn how to point to the title of a book, be able to hold the book correctly, find the first page, etc. He did good on that for the most part. Now moving towards letter sounds. So there's obviously LS1, 2, and 3. So in letter sounds 1, First, I would use a yellow sheet of paper. that was provided to us as an assessment tool, and I would point to a letter and ask the student to say the sound that the letter makes. So if I were to point to the letter S, they would have to tell me what that sound was. And Michael did overall pretty good at this. He was able to achieve a 17 out of 30 in total of that set, which was pretty well. Next, in LS2, letter sound 2, the objective was actually involved some writing, which was great. So the student I had to number a sheet of paper from 1 to 31, and then I would say a letter sound, for example, and then Michael had to write down the sound, or write down the letter that sound made. And so he did not do amazing in this section. He only receiving a 10 out of 30. He mainly struggled with this when it came to blends like ch or the CK sound. I think that was something that really he struggled to understand, but we built upon that a lot in our tutoring plans for later. And then finally, and for letter sounds 3, Michael received a 23 out of 26, which was pretty impressive. So he had to identify letter names. And again, we use the manipulative of the sheet of paper where I would point to a letter and I'd ask the student to tell me its name of the letter. So if I were to point to the letter E, they would say that is the letter E. And so Michael showed very strong strength in that area, even though in the other letter sounds he wasn't as strong in. So that was good to see that he clearly understands letters, which can then take into further with our learning. So that concludes our pre-assessment results, and now we're going to move into the post-pre-assessment activities. So based on the performance of Michael, I had to pick activities selected from the SFA tutoring manual, as well as just strategies that are beneficial, and I had to target and highlight areas that Michael was struggling and create activities that could boost his growth in literacy. So after the pre-assessment, it was determined that Michael would be on Tutoring Plan 1, which is the first tutoring plan to build skills upon. And so for the activities I selected for this, for these 4 direct instruction lessons, I chose to mainly focus on phonemic awareness, as he really struggled with understanding how to segment sounds. So that was the main objective for 3 of the activities. For the first activity, we used saying it fast with vocabulary. So during the pre-assessment, Michael struggled to blend words together and often tried to repeat the same word over and over due to lack of confidence. During our instructional time, though, I used say it fast to tackle his lack of confidence in his abilities. I noticed that he knew the information because he would say the correct word, but then he would try to change his mind seconds after. And so I tried to provide positive support in this lesson and just tell him to say it fast, say it quickly. And over time, in that repetition, he was able to improve. Next, addressing phonemic awareness 3, we used break it down. And this was something that we used consistently throughout multiple tutoring plans. And so in break it down, Michael learned how to separate phoneme sounds. And he enjoyed this activity a lot because we use a dry erase board, which was a massive manipulative we used throughout all of our tutoring plans. But I noticed that he struggled at first with this activity because he would try and place middle sounds with end sounds in the same box. However, every time through repetition, he's able to separate beginning, middle, and end sounds to perform at a higher rate. Again, phonemic awareness 3, we use the strategy tap it out. So in this assessment, Michael would point to different sounds and to tap them out theoretically. So in this activity, I would say a 2 or 3 phoneme word, and then Michael would use his pencil to lightly tap the desk for each word's phonemes within it. And he enjoyed this because he's a very active kid and has lots of high energy, and so he liked to have things in his hands, and a pencil was one of those, and he was constantly tapping, but we learned to tap in a positive way. Our final activity relates to letter sound objectives, and so the activity I chose was identify letter sounds, and so in this we used key cards, which were picture cards provided by the school, and then I would point to a card and a picture and say, listen to what I say, and I could say a word like mountain, and really emphasize that sound, and over time, Michael was really able to excel at this skill. Looking at the side, so looking here at the slide, you can see the tutoring plan that we used, and with the time frame and the objectives that we had. And for example, we had goals, and so goals would be like if they were able to break down words using their arm, which was a skill that we used quite a bit, they would get a piece of candy as a result if they were able to do this repeatedly. And so for the words that were chosen for these activities, they were first off either based off of the assessment and the data from that, or from the books that were implemented into their reading classes and the objectives that they were currently on, whether they were vowel sounds or certain blends. These words were based off of their reading material. After the completion of my 4 direct instructive lessons, we then moved into reassessment of the material using the first assessment once again. Now looking at the reassessment results, so PA1 and PA2 were obviously mastered in the previous pre-assessment, so we no longer needed to assess that data. Looking at PA3, so previously Michael had a 1 out of 10 on this, and he showed great improvement by receiving a 7 out of 10 when we came to breaking down a word presented orally. Moving on to concepts of print, he was able to master all the skills, and transitioning into letter sounds 1, he received a 26 out of 30, which was a great improvement from the 17 out of 30, and so he reached high levels and is close to mastery. Next, letter sounds 2, he received a 21 out of 30, so room for improvement, but again, great strides. Continuing with our reassessment results, letter sounds 3, he received a 26 out of 26, so he completely mastered that objective at identifying letter names. So Michael performed really well at letter sounds and phonemic awareness and concepts of print, and he performed so well actually that he was able to move on to the second part of the assessment, which brings him to at least a tutoring plan too. And so the first thing that we assessed within this new assessment was sight words. And so we're going to look at the figures of the sets in this. So in sight words 1, there is a word list that is provided on the student assessment pages, and the instructor's responsibility is to read each word and point to it and ask the student to read each word as I point to it, And on this, there are multiple sets. Within the first set, Michael received a 9 out of 12, which is close to mastery. And then in set 2, he received a 2 out of 15. Clearly he did really well in set number 1, but in number 2, he needs great improvement. Next, we move on to the objective that is word skills. And in this assessment of word skills, students need to read each word as I point to it. And so in this set number 1, he received a 4 out of 5, and in set 2, he received a 1 out of 5. And complete mastery is a 5 out of 5 of each set, and so he was close in set number 1. However, in set number 2, he needed great improvement. And then finally, within our second assessment, or our reassessment 1, in word skills 2, the objective is that the instructor says a word and then uses it in a sentence and then asks the student to repeat the word and then say the sounds that they hear in the word and then write the word down on a sheet of paper. And so in this, he was able to master the first set, getting a 3 out of 3, which shows mastery. And then the second set, he was able to receive a 2 out of 3. And so he definitely could understand the material. He just needed to be a little bit more developed. So the activities following the reassessment 1, we went back to phonemic awareness again to break it down because Michael really enjoys this activity. Next, moving into letter sounds, we did the activity letter sound, letter blending card match. And so in this activity, you place for about 4 cards down on the table, and then I point to a letter, and then I ask the student to tell me what the sound of that letter makes and relate it back to the card. For word skills, we used learning to use the finger detective, and so this activity is done with the Fast Track Phonics Partner Practice booklet, which is the books that they receive in class. However, I noticed that Michael wasn't a huge fan of this activity, so we ended up scrapping it after this set of direct instructions. It just wasn't his favorite thing to do, and he didn't really enjoy this activity. For word skills, we did drawing lines for sounds, and so in this activity, it requires a pen or pencil and paper, and then we practice counting the sounds that we hear in words, and he enjoyed this activity, especially with the select set of words that we had. He enjoyed this. And finally, for sight words, we did sight word picture cards, and I noticed that Michael really enjoys working with the picture cards because he's able to visualize it, and that kind of leads me to believe that he's a very visual learner. But this was definitely beneficial to have this activity, and it was incorporated later into the assessments as well. Again, looking at the tutoring plan, you can see some of our objectives that we mainly wanted to focus on. Michael really struggled to understand the CH sound, which makes the ch, and so that was the main focus, as well as the sh sound and the th. And when it came to words, we really focused on the CK sounds, so like in the word dock or sock, or just understanding the sound that an O can make, an ah or an oo. And so this was very prominent within our tutoring plan. After those 4 direct instruction lessons, we moved into a reassessment 2, which we will now go over those results. So in phonemic awareness 3, he received an 8 out of 10, reaching mastery. And then in letter sounds 1, he received a 27 out of 30. So again, great improvements. And then letter sounds 2, a 26 out of 30. And then moving into sight words, he received a 10 out of 12 of set number 1, and then set number 2, an 8 out of 15. And then in word sounds, set number 1 was a 5 out of 5, so that's a mastery, and set 2 was a 3 out of 5, so again, improvements. And then in word sounds 2 received a 2 out of 3, and set number 3, a 1 out of 3. So now we're going to look at the summative assessment results, which show all 3 parts of the assessments and his improvement over time. So you can see here we have 3 different figures, 3 different things being assessed. So there's pre-assessment, the reassessment 1, and then the reassessment 2. So when it came to PA1 and pre-assessment, he performed at a 90%, reaching mastery, and then at PA2 he was at a 70%. Then in PA3 he had a 10%, and then concepts of print he had a 66%, letter sounds 1, 56, letter sounds 2, 33, and letter sounds 3, and 88%. Moving into the reassessment, he mastered and achieved PA1 and 2, so you no longer see those figures on the graph anymore. But then in his reassessment of PA3, he moved from a 10% to a 70%, and then in CP, concept of print, a 66% to a 100%, reaching mastery. And then the letter sounds 1, 56% to an 86%, so a great improvement there. And then letter sounds 2 went from a 33 to a 70%, so it's like about a 40% increase. And then in letter sounds 3, he went from 88% to 100%, reaching mastery of that skill. Now moving into the final reassessment 2 of the part 1 results. So PA1, PA2 were already achieved. In PA3, he went from a 70% to an 80%, reaching mastery. And then in C, concepts of print, already mastered. And letter sounds 1, he went from an 86 to a 90%, so a slight increase there, but again, improvement. And letter sounds 2 went from 70% to 86%, so a massive improvement there as well. And letter sounds 3 was already mastered. Moving into sight word results, on the reassessment 1, he went from a 75% and then increased to a 83% within the second reassessment. And then on the other set 2 of reassessment 1, he had a 13% and then moved to a 53% for the reassessment 2. So set 2 had a massive improvement. Set 1 had a slighter, less noticeable improvement, but again, improvement is still measured and still acknowledged. For word skills, he originally in set 1 had 80%. By reassessment, he had a 100%, reaching mastery, and set 2 originally had a 20%, moving to a 60% in the reassessment 2. So a great improvement there. Finally, in word skills 2, set 1, he already received mastery at 100%, and moving into set 2 of the first reassessment, he had a 60%, but then reached a mastery of 100% by the second reassessment. And then for set 3, he received a 30% on the second reassessment. Next, we'll discuss some of the strategies that were embedded throughout our time tutoring together. So the strategies I found most effective were to break it down. He really enjoyed being able to segment sounds, and I saw really great improvements using this skill. Additionally, he liked the letter sound letter blending card match because, again, like I mentioned earlier, he liked visuals and learned a lot from that and would ask to play that activity often. Additionally, tap it out was really beneficial for him as he enjoyed tapping with his pencil quite often, so this was a kinesthetic experience for him. Next, I employed a strategy of my own called take a picture. So whenever he would complete a word or write something down, or we'd finish our learning for the day, I would ask him to take a picture with his hands. He would pretend to take a picture to capture the moment so he could remember it. And I know that he liked to do it, and he was really proud of the work that he would do after he would take a picture. Next, I included check it off, which is after he created a word or did something correct, he would physically check it off on his dry erase board or pencil and paper. Next, I used now draw it. This is again something that I created myself. So if I asked him to write a word or so, I would sometimes allow him to draw a picture of it for visual purposes, which helped him with the learning process overall. And then finally, the daily review game. After we conclude learning for the day, I'd ask him to think back of at least 2 words that we did that day and ask him to write down those words just to embed repetition. Now moving to relationship to science of reading and final recommendation. So the connections of the science of reading are very prominent throughout the tutoring experience. So one is that it builds upon background knowledge. So I had to connect Michael's previous knowledge from his reading classroom with the new information that was being taught to him, either from his books that we were presented with or just common vocabulary that he was used to experiencing. Additionally, vocabulary strategies. So this was a common thing that was embedded throughout our practices relating to students or success for all. And then this also led to building sight recognition. So using our letter cards and using pamphlets and books that had words that he was used to seeing, it was building sight recognition throughout that process. And additionally, repetition is also really important throughout Scarborough's reading rope, and the idea of science of reading is that skilled reading is achieved through continuous repetition of practice. Especially when you have these different strands that are woven together, it increases strategic learning process and becomes increasingly automatic. And finally, purpose of skilled reading. So by including all of these different instructional techniques and evidence-based practices, you reach the purpose of skilled reading, connecting it to the idea of science of reading. My final recommendation for Michael would be that he continues with Tutoring Plan 1 or Tutoring Plan 2 for right now. However, I'm sure with at least 1 or 2 more weeks, he would definitely increase to Tutoring Plan 2. That being said, he should continue to be tutored by a student from EDU 345 or just someone else who can teach the same process. Additionally, I'd recommend speech therapy. I noticed that a lot of his sounds that he couldn't work on or that he couldn't improve in were the CH sounds and the TH sounds and the SH sounds. This is because I think that he has a lisp, and if you were to receive speech therapy, this could be greatly beneficial for him overall and help him understand reading and literacy better. Finally, he should also have his eyes tested for glasses. I know he mentioned several times throughout our tutoring time that he struggles to read the board, and this could be an indication that maybe he has poor eyesight, so I would recommend to his teachers or someone from the school that he should get tested for his eyes. Significant ideas. So connecting my tutoring experience to theories and research that we did throughout the classroom. So first, I found the St. John Bosco article very beneficial. So I love the idea of holistic teaching, and I think this is something very prominent throughout our tutoring experience, is the idea of preventative teaching methods. So you want to learn how to connect with your students and make them feel appreciated, make them feel valued, and doing this, they just have a stronger desire to be motivated to do learning and to enjoy the learning experience. Additionally, building character was something that John Bosco discussed quite frequently, and the idea of building character and learners starts at a young age, and especially for first grade students, I found this really to be a prominent idea, is that unfortunately Steubenville does have students who are more at risk, but if we build character within them at a young age, we can lower the risk of them being involved in activities that could be putting them at risk in the future and just helping them stay focused on their studies and academics. The other research article I found beneficial to my experience was the trauma article. So Michael briefly mentioned that it seems like him and his parents have really strong issues, and their marriage was not very successful for several reasons, and it seems like he may have unfortunately dealt with a lot of neglect and just negative emotions in his life as a result. So I think it was really important with him to understand that I could be his ally, and he came to me as someone who could be his advocate several times, someone he could confide in, and I think that's really important that you build that rapport with your students. Finally, he was very overly critical at first, but we learned to change their perspective in a positive way, and that trauma article really helped me to find some ways of how to give positive praise to students, especially with Michael. Ideas learned from experience. So finally, ideas I will take with me into a future interview or just into my future teaching experiences is one that student interest plays a big role in the learning process. I learned to include books and ideas and stories and words that I knew piqued Michael's interests, and that played a big role in him wanting to enjoy the learning process with me. Additionally, using interests of rewards is using candy or toys. Secondly, each learner is unique and requires different approaches to enforce learning. So I did have 2 students that I tutored with. However, with Michael, I noticed that it was very different compared to the other tutee that I had. So it was learning that some methods and some approaches are better for others. And I think I would use this in an interview to show that each student is unique and different and requires different approaches to attention and to their learning process, especially when it comes to the contents of reading and literacy. Thank you guys so much for watching.